Tunnels are strange places. Whether they run under mountains, cities, rivers, or abandoned roads, there's something deeply unsettling about them. Maybe it's the darkness, the echo of your own footsteps, or the way sound seems to warp around the cold, damp walls. Maybe it's the fact that once you're inside, there's only two ways out: forward or back. We pass through tunnels every day without thinking much of it. But hidden behind those concrete walls and rusted pipes are stories most people never hear about. Stories of people who walked into a tunnel and never came back out. Of strange figures that seem to materialize from the darkness. Of disappearances, whispers in the dark, and cold fingers brushing against your back when no one's there. Tonight, I've got 3 of the most disturbing true tunnel horror stories I've ever come across. All of them happen to real people. People who were just trying to get from one place to another and ended up in situations they'll never forget, if they made it out at all. Here are 3 horrifying true tunnel horror stories. Story 1. The Screamer in the Drain Tunnel, submitted by Evan C. Location: suburban Pennsylvania. This happened when I was 17, back in the spring of 2012. Lived in a small suburb about 30 minutes outside of Pittsburgh. My neighborhood was the kind where nothing really happened. Safe, quiet, predictable. The kind of place where kids rode bikes until sunset and parents never locked their doors. But just behind my high school, buried in the woods, was something that didn't fit the town at all. It was an old storm drain tunnel, about 6 feet high, lined with graffiti and reeking of mildew. Local legend said it stretched for miles under the town, built during the 60s to redirect water during heavy floods. But for us teenagers, it was just the Screamer Tunnel. They called it that because if you went in far enough, about a quarter mile in, you'd start to hear this high-pitched, distant screaming. Not loud, not frantic, just constant, like someone crying out very softly from somewhere way down the tunnel. Everyone claimed it was just wind or pipes shifting underground. But every once in a while, someone would come out pale and shaken, swearing they'd heard words in that scream. Something like, "Don't turn around." Of course, my friends and I were the kind of dumb that only teenage boys can be. One Friday night, fueled by a few stolen beers and a dare, we decided to go all the way in. There were 4 of us, me, Dave, Chris, and Brandon. We brought flashlights, a Bluetooth speaker for music, and a can of orange spray paint to tag the walls. Nothing serious, just a night of being dumb and brave. The first few hundred feet were uneventful. We laughed, played music, even did some echoey yelling down the tunnel. The air smelled stale and water trickled beneath our shoes, but nothing scary yet. The walls were covered in graffiti, mostly tags and weird symbols, but there was this one piece that stood out. A huge red circle with what looked like handprints smudged around it. Below it, someone had scrawled, "She lives in the sound." We took a photo, made some jokes, and kept walking. Then maybe 15 minutes in, the air started to feel thick. That's the only way I can describe it. Our flashlights were flickering slightly, and the sound from the speaker got warbly and low, like it was underwater. That's when we heard it, the scream. It wasn't sudden or loud. It just sort of faded in like background noise you didn't notice at first. A high, whining moan that stayed perfectly steady. At first we thought it was feedback from the speaker. But when we turned it off, the sound kept going. Brandon was the first to want to bail. He said the air felt wrong in his chest story, number 2, the screaming in the Dorsey Tunnel. This happened to Tyler, who was an amateur urban explorer, back in the mid-2000s, mostly in Maryland. He had a thing for old, abandoned infrastructure, defunct train stations, water towers, and especially tunnels. The Dorsey Tunnel near Elkridge had been on his list for a while. It was an old, disused railroad tunnel from the 1800s, carved right into a wooded hillside and completely out of commission. Local legends said it was haunted by workers who died during its construction, but to Tyler, that just made it more exciting. He picked a chilly November evening to check it out. Around 6 p.m., he parked off a back road and hiked his way through the brush to find the tunnel mouth. It was partially sealed off with rusted fencing, but someone had clearly cut through it at some point. There was just enough room to slide through. The air changed the second he stepped inside. Cold, still, and dense. His flashlight barely pierced the dark, and each footstep echoed in waves against the curved walls. About 200 feet in, he noticed something weird. The faint sound of dripping water, rhythmic but with an offbeat screeching noise layered faintly over it. He thought it might be an animal, maybe a raccoon caught on something. He kept walking, D-D-I-C. Roughly the halfway mark, the tunnel curved slightly. That's where things got strange. His flashlight flickered for the first time, then again. Suddenly, behind him, he heard it, clear as day. A scream. Not a scream for help. A raw, guttural wail that tore through the air like someone being tortured. And then another. And another. He turned around fast, shining the beam behind him. Nothing. Just the mist from his own breath and the same empty tunnel. But the screams continued. Louder, closer. He ran. What was a slow-paced exploration turned into a dead sprint. He didn't stop to check his surroundings, just kept going until he hit daylight at the tunnel's far end. Once he was out, he collapsed into the dirt, chest heaving. Tyler never went back to the Dorsey Tunnel. He later found out that several people had claimed to hear the same screams in that tunnel over the years, and that 2 people were actually found dead near its center back in the 1950s. One had a broken neck from a fall. The other? Unexplained. Internal trauma, as if crushed from the inside out. The case was never solved. Story number 3. The Man in the Silver Tunnel. In 2012, Mia and her older cousin Jordan decided to go hiking in Northern California, near the Sierra foothills. They were on a trail that was known more to locals than tourists, and it cut through a massive nature reserve. One of the highlights of the hike was an old water diversion tunnel known as the Silver Tunnel, because it was lined with dull, corrugated steel and shimmered when light bounced off its walls. The tunnel was long, over a quarter mile, and dark, but completely walkable. Most hikers passed through it to get to the other side of the trail instead of hiking around the steep slope. Mia was nervous, but Jordan was a typical older cousin, fearless, teasing, and a little reckless. They stepped inside, lit only by a pair of strong headlamps. It was cool, damp, and unnervingly quiet. The only sound was the slow drip of water and the crunch of their boots. About a minute in, Jordan stopped suddenly. "Did you hear that?" he asked. Mia paused. "What?" he pointed. Ahead, it sounded like whistling. They stood still for a moment. At first, nothing. Then, clear as day, a tune drifted down the tunnel from up ahead. Slow, steady. Someone was whistling, "You Are My Sunshine." It was chilling. There were no other hikers around, and they hadn't seen anyone enter the tunnel before or after them. "We should go back," Mia whispered. But Jordan, ever the brave one, said, "Let's just get through it." They kept walking. The whistling continued. It didn't get closer, it just stayed, like it was being projected from everywhere at once. The lights flickered once, and when they stabilized, Jordan stopped dead in his tracks. About 20 feet ahead of them stood a man. He was tall, barefoot, wearing filthy clothes and standing perfectly still in the middle of the tunnel. His face was in shadow, but something about the way he stood, chest puffed, chin slightly raised, didn't feel right. He wasn't surprised to see them. He wasn't confused. He was waiting. "Turn around," Jordan said quietly, grabbing Mia's arm. As they turned, they saw movement behind them. Another figure. Now there were 2 people in the tunnel, one at each end. Trapped. Panic set in. Jordan pulled Mia toward the wall, brushing past a thin maintenance ledge. He pointed to a side pipe that stuck out of the tunnel halfway through, something he'd noticed earlier on the map. It led to a runoff ditch. It was tight but just wide enough to crawl through. They scrambled inside, scraping themselves on the jagged metal. The pipe ran uphill and exited near a small stream outside the tunnel. They sprinted for their car and didn't stop until they were back in town. A ranger they spoke to later said the tunnel had a history of weird encounters. Vagrants, yes, but also unexplainable things. Lights, sounds, figures that vanished. And a few hikers had gone missing in that area over the last decade, usually reported days later, found dazed and disoriented miles from where they'd disappeared. To this day, Mia refuses to listen to "You Are My Sunshine." The tune still makes her stomach turn.